Hi everyone, it's Nancy Godrat. In this session, I'm going to go over the concept of under or over applied overhead. Remember, manufacturing overhead is one of the three costs of manufacturing for a product. And manufacturing overhead are costs that are related to factory but are not direct material or direct labor. So anything related to factories, such as factory repairs, factory utilities, factory insurance, factory rent, all those are considered manufacturing overhead costs. Now, when we have the actual costs, we debit manufacturing overhead account, and when we estimate how much of that cost should be applied to each job, we're going to credit the account. And the estimation is based on having a predetermined overhead cost, which is calculated at the beginning of the year by looking at total estimated overhead cost for the year divided by total estimated activity base. And as you remember, activity base could be direct labor cost or direct labor hours or machinery hours, depending on which one the company decides to use. Now, the applied overhead cost always is going to get credited to manufacturing overhead. Now, once we are at the end of the year, we need to see what is the ending balance of this account. Either it's going to have a debit ending balance or credit ending balance. If it has a debit ending balance, it means that the actual cost of overhead was larger, greater than applied overhead, meaning that our estimation was not enough to cover all our actual costs. In this case, we call it we under applied overhead. The opposite is true too. Sometimes we might estimate too much and apply too much cost to our jobs compared to our actual costs. So if applied costs are more than actual costs, we will have a credit balance in this account, which is considered over applied overhead, giving too much overhead to the jobs. At the end of each year, we need to arrive at zero balance in our account, in our manufacturing overhead account, meaning we have to make sure our actual cost equals our estimated cost. Otherwise, we have incorrect financial statement. How do we do that? We only do it at the end of the year. We do not do this at the end of each month. That's a lot of work. So at the end of the year, we're going to prepare an adjusting entry. An adjusting entry will affect two accounts, manufacturing overhead and cost of goods sold. We use cost of goods sold because our assumption for this class is that all the jobs that we manufactured during the year are sold by the end of the year, which is not a true assumption in real world, but you will see that in other advanced accounting courses, really the ending balance in manufacturing overhead should be applied, allocated to a couple of different accounts. But in this class, we're just gonna look at the cost of goods sold as the account that we're going to adjust. So let's go over an example. Let's see, for this example, the company Wallace during the year has had actual cost of 23,800, which is the addition of 13,800, 6,000, and 4,000. But the applied overhead, the estimated overhead given to the jobs were less. It was 22,400. So it ended up with the ending debit balance of 1,400. So they have under applied overhead because they didn't give enough overhead to the jobs. So therefore, at the end of the year, we need to prepare an adjusting entry and get rid of this $1,400 in this account. So we need to arrive at zero balance in manufacturing overhead account. If it has a debit balance of $1,400, we need to credit manufacturing overhead account to arrive at zero balance, and the other side of the entry will go to cost of goods sold. So in this case, we debit cost of goods sold, credit manufacturing overhead, and the order of the accounts, debit to cost of goods sold, credit to manufacturing overhead, is always true if we have a over applied, if we have a under applied overhead. So in this case, when we prepare an income statement, the unadjusted balance of cost of goods sold, in this case, let's say was 39,000, and then we're gonna increase it by that under applied overhead. Why increase it? Because cost of goods sold is an expense. The debit increases that expense. So therefore now we have cost of goods sold of 40,400. Now let's go an example that we're going to go over an over applied overhead. An over applied overhead, I'm going to use an example. Let's say actual cost of direct labor for the year was 87,000, and direct labor is actually the activity. Direct labor cost is the activity base for the company, meaning they use direct labor cost to apply overhead. And let's say the predetermined overhead rate for the year was 140%. That was calculated and given to us. So therefore, our applied overhead becomes 121,800 by multiplying actual overhead costs by the predetermined overhead rate. That's your applied overhead cost. And let's say the actual cost given to us during the year was 119,000. So these are the facts. Facts of the problem is actual overhead costs were 119,000 for the year. And the predetermined overhead rate is 140%, which is applied based on direct labor costs, and direct labor cost for the year was 87,000. So now that we have the facts, I can go over the example. So actual cost, always the actual cost is on the debit side of manufacturing overhead account. Applied is on the credit side. So in this case, the applied cost was more than actual, so we over applied. We gave too much cost of overhead to our jobs. Over applied overhead, again, we need to arrive at zero balance at the end of the year, meaning our actual cost and applied cost should be equal. To arrive at zero balance when we have an over applied overhead situation, we're going to debit manufacturing overhead cost and credit cost of goods sold for in this case for the 2,800. And this adjusting entry is done at the end of the year. So if we have under applied overhead, we debit cost of goods sold, credit manufacturing overhead account. But if we have over applied overhead, we debit manufacturing overhead account and credit cost of goods sold. I hope this provides some clarification about under and over applied overhead. If you have any questions, please send me an email via Canvas.